The salt spray used to taste like freedom. Now it just tastes like cheap perfume from the endless line of tourists posing on my dock. My boat, the Sea Serpent, hasn't felt a real deep-sea current in 6 months. Instead, she's a prop. I'm Hank Miller, 52, and I've become a parking lot attendant for my own vessel here in Gloucester. "Just one more picture, Hank," a voice chirped. I forced a smile, my jaw aching. They didn't see the fisherman. They saw the guy from the newspaper. They saw the legend, but the legend was a cage. My hand tightened on the worn steering wheel, the wood groaning under the pressure. This wasn't a victory, it was a prison. A heavy hand clapped my shoulder. "That's the spirit, Hank. Keep that $1,000,000 smile going." The voice was as slick as oil on water, Marcus Thorne. He looked like he'd stepped off a yacht in a magazine, his polished loafers an insult to the salt-stained wood of my dock. He was the architect of this cage, the man who saw my record catch not as a fisherman's triumph, but as a branding opportunity. He'd bought the pier space next to mine under the guise of a partnership and systematically turned my life into a sideshow. "The Q2 numbers are fantastic," he said, flashing his phone. "We're selling Sea Serpent's t-shirts in 5 different colors now." I didn't look at the screen. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a real squall was brewing. He was talking about revenue streams. I was thinking about the tide charts. "Don't forget the Coastal Living interview Friday," he added, straightening his blazer. "They love the whole grizzled old sea dog angle." He winked, and the cheap perfume in the air suddenly smelled like sulfur. I wasn't a legend. I was a mascot. The memory still burned behind my eyes, clearer than the hazy afternoon sun 6 months ago. A nor'easter was churning the Atlantic into a gray fury, and every sane fisherman was tied to a cleat on shore. But I knew those currents. I felt the hit on the line not as a tug, but as an explosion. For 9 brutal hours it was just me and the beast, a war of will and sinew. When I finally hauled the bluefin aboard, it looked like something from a sea myth. A silver giant, nearly 500 pounds, a ghost of the deep. The photo of me, haggard and grinning next to the monster, hit the wire services before I'd even hosed the blood off the deck. My phone melted. TV crews, magazines, a book deal. I was the king of Gloucester. For about a week. That's when Marcus Thorne appeared. He found me at the Salty Dog Tavern, buying around for the old-timers who'd taught me everything. He didn't order a beer. He had a bottle of sparkling water. He slid onto the stool beside me, his loafers gleaming under the dim bar light. "Hank," he said, his voice smooth as a calm sea after a storm. "You've got a legend on your hands. A real American story. But legends need managing." He leaned in, a conspiratorial smile playing on his lips. "Let me handle the sharks on land. You stick to the ones in the water." I was a fisherman, not a CEO. His talk of LLCs, marketing synergy, and brand potential was a foreign language. The deal he laid out seemed simple. He'd manage the sudden fame, get us on TV, and handle bookings. I'd get a bigger cut and more time doing what I loved. It felt like a lifeline. I signed. The first crack in the illusion was the new sign he installed on the pier. Home of the Gloucester Goliath. My boat's name, the Sea Serpent, was in smaller letters underneath, an afterthought. Then came the t-shirts, my face crudely printed on cheap cotton. The real betrayal came a month later. I was prepping for a 6-man charter, a group of regulars I'd taken out for a decade. Marcus strolled down the dock, holding his phone. "Cancel it," he said. "We've got a corporate photo op. Better exposure." "These guys booked a year ago, Marcus," I'd argued, my voice tight. He just shrugged, tapping his phone. "The contract gives me final say on scheduling and vessel use. It's a branding asset now, Hank, not just a boat." That was it. The moment the steel bars of the cage slammed shut. My legend wasn't mine anymore. It was his product. The Coastal Living reporter, a young woman with a microphone that looked more expensive than my best reel, asked her 4th question about my emotional state during the catch. Before I could form a real answer, Marcus cut in. "Hank was one with the ocean," he declared, his arm slung over my shoulder for the camera. "It was a spiritual battle, a testament to the human spirit against the raw power of nature." I just stood there, a prop in my own story, smelling his cologne and the foul lie of his words. He was selling a version of me I didn't recognize. When they packed up, he patted my cheek. "Perfect! You're a natural, Hank. The quiet, stoic type. It plays great. The humiliation followed me into town. At the marine supply store, I saw Sully, a man I'd shared 1,000 pre-dawn coffees with. He was buying bait. He saw me and his gaze flickered away, his shoulders tightening. I walked over. "Sully, been a while." He grunted, not meeting my eye. "Heard you're a celebrity now, Hank, too busy for the likes of us." "It's not like that," I started, but the words felt hollow. "Isn't it?" he said, finally looking at me. His eyes, usually crinkling with humor, were flat and cold. "Saw your face on a coffee mug. My kid asked if you still fished or just signed autographs now." He paid for his bait and walked out, leaving me standing in the aisle, the shame burning hotter than any sunburn. He didn't just think I'd sold my boat. He thought I'd sold my soul. A week later, Marcus found me swabbing the deck, the one real task he still let me perform. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Big news, I'm throwing a party. The 1-year Goliath Gala, a celebration of your catch. We're going to moor the Sea Serpent at the Central Wharf downtown for the night. Caterers, a local celebrity host, the works." I stopped scrubbing. "The Central Wharf? Marcus, that's a tourist trap. The currents there are tricky, and the wake from the harbor traffic will beat her against the pilings." He waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about the details. We'll have extra bumpers. We need the optics, Hank. Imagine it. Velvet ropes, a red carpet leading right onto the deck. It's the centerpiece." He showed me the mock-up on his tablet. My boat, bathed in colored lights, my face plastered on a giant banner behind it. He saw a stage. I saw a desecration. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tide charts were spread across my small kitchen table. I switched on the marine radio, listening to the monotonous drone of the weather reports. A low-pressure system was forming off the Carolinas, tracking north. A familiar pattern. The kind of system that could churn up into a vicious nor'easter in a heartbeat. The kind of storm that kept sane men in port. The kind of storm only a fool would ignore. Marcus wanted a centerpiece. He wanted to use my boat, my legend, as a party decoration. He'd ignored my warnings about the currents, about the wake, about treating a vessel like a toy. He had no respect for the sea. A slow, cold smile spread across my face for the first time in months. The sea gives, but it also takes. And Marcus Thorne was about to learn just how quickly the tide could turn. He wanted a show. I'd give him one he would never forget. The next morning, I found Marcus on the pier, barking orders into his phone. He saw me approach, and his posture stiffened, ready for another fight. I cut him off before he could start. "About the party," I said, my voice flat. "What about it?" he snapped, lowering his phone. "The contracts are signed, Hank. It's happening." I gave a slow nod, letting my shoulders slump just enough. "You're right. It's a big deal. Good for the brand." I looked at the asterisk Sea Serpent tablet jawed, then back at him. "What do you need me to do?" The surprise on his face was worth a month's humiliation. He blinked, recovering quickly. A triumphant, patronizing smile spread across his lips. "That's the spirit! I knew you'd come around." He gestured to a pile of brand-new, bright white ropes near a cleat. "We need to swap out these old mooring lines for these. They'll look better for the cameras." I walked over and picked one up. It was cheap nylon, stiff and slick, the kind of rope a weekend boater buys because it looks pretty. Useless in a real blow. "They look great, Marcus," I said, meeting his gaze. "Very photogenic." I spent the afternoon working, my movements deliberate. While Marcus was busy coordinating with caterers, I tied the new lines to the Sea Serpent cleats. I used the knots he'd recognized from boating magazines. Show knots, pretty and clean. They looked secure. To a man like him, they were perfect. To a real storm, they were an invitation. As I worked, Sully walked past on the opposite dock. He saw me tying the pristine ropes and just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. I didn't look back at him. I just kept my head down and my hands busy. Later, as the sky began to bruise with the approaching evening, Marcus clapped me on the back again. The first drops of a light rain had begun to fall. "Just a coastal shower," he said, waving it away. "Adds to the atmosphere." He was beaming, high on his own success. "The generator for the lights is all set. The red carpet is on its way. All you have to do is get her over to the Central Wharf, Hank. Tie her up tight. The party starts at 7. Be ready to smile." "I'll be ready," I said, looking past him, out toward the harbor mouth where the waves were starting to build, their white caps looking like teeth in the fading light. He saw a party. I saw a reckoning. The sea was coming to reclaim its own, and I was going to make damn sure the Sea Serpent was there to greet it. The thrum of the diesel engine was a ghost in my chest, a familiar comfort I hadn't felt in months. Guiding the Sea Serpent out of my slip and into the main channel, I felt the first real bite of the wind. The light rain had turned cold and sharp, plastering my hair to my forehead. Marcus's coastal shower was growing teeth. The harbor was a slate-gray chop, and my boat met it with a steady, knowing rhythm. She knew this weather. She was born for it. I was taking her to her own execution, and she was thanking me for the exercise. Rounding the breakwater, the Central Wharf came into view. It looked like a cheap carnival had crashed into a funeral. Brightly colored tents flapped violently in the wind, and a string of festive lights, already flickering, cast a sickly glow on the wet planks. A miserable-looking catering crew was struggling to secure a tablecloth over a long table, while a man in a tuxedo yelled into a headset. And in the middle of it all was Marcus, a beacon of dry, tailored arrogance under a massive golf umbrella. He saw me approach and waved me in, pointing to a spot right in front of the main tent. It was the most exposed position on the wharf, taking the full force of the wind and the confused, rebounding waves from the seawall. A textbook rookie mistake. A perfect place for an accident. As I nudged the Sea Serpent against the thick rubber bumpers, Marcus shouted over the wind, "Perfect, Hank. Right on the money. Let's get these new lines on her, make her look pretty for our guests." I grabbed one of the slick white nylon ropes. They felt greasy in the rain, offering no real purchase. I started with the bow. I threaded the line through the boat's chock and looped it around the wharf's massive iron cleat. I tied a flawless-looking bowline, the kind they teach in sailing school. It was clean, symmetrical, and utterly useless for this. A bowline is strong, but under the violent, cyclical jerking of a storm surge, it can work itself loose if not under constant, heavy tension. I left just enough slack for it to do exactly that. It looked like a professional job. It was a time bomb. "Looking good," Marcus yelled, his voice thin against a sudden gust that nearly ripped the umbrella from his hand. "Hurry it up! The mayor is arriving any minute!" I moved to the stern, my back to him. Here the pilings were old, scarred with rust and barnacles. One had a jagged metal plate bolted to its side, a remnant of some long-forgotten repair. It was a razor blade hidden in plain sight. I took the second pristine white rope and ran it around a piling farther down, bringing it back to the stern cleat. On its path, the rope lay directly across that sharp, rusted edge. I pulled it tight, feeling the nylon fibers grind against the metal. To anyone watching, I was just securing the boat. But I was wounding the line, giving the storm a place to start chewing. It wouldn't snap at first. It would hold, fraying with every wave that slammed the Sea Serpent against the bumpers, until the fibers gave way in one final, catastrophic pop. My hands moved with the practiced efficiency of 30 years at sea. I added 2 spring lines, tying them with the same photogenic but ultimately unreliable knots. They looked like a web of security. In reality, they were a carefully designed sequence of failures. Each line was set to give way in a specific order, allowing the boat to pivot just so, ensuring when she broke free, she wouldn't just drift. The current and the wind would catch her stern and push her bow out, directly toward the harbor mouth. Directly toward the open sea. I finished the last knot and wiped my wet hands on my jeans. I stood on the deck of my boat, surrounded by the gaudy trappings of Marcus's party. The red carpet, now soaked a dark, bloody color, had been rolled out to the gangplank. A speaker crackled to life, blasting some vapid pop song that was immediately shredded by the wind. Marcus strode over, his polished shoes slipping on the wet deck. "Excellent work, Hank. She's not going anywhere." He beamed, looking from the boat to the pathetic gathering of his first guests. huddled under the main tent. This is it. The night the Sea Serpent brand goes from local legend to national icon. The wind is picking up, Marcus, I said, my voice low and even. The weather report called for gale force gusts after 9. He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand toward the churning gray water. It's atmosphere, it's drama. People will love it. They'll tell their friends they survived a nor'easter at the Goliath Gala. He straightened his tie. Now, get yourself cleaned up. You're on in an hour. We need you by the wheel, smiling for pictures. I looked at him, at his smug, confident face, completely blind to the power gathering around him. He hadn't just ignored the sea, he was mocking it. He saw it as a backdrop, a special effect. I don't think I'll be doing that, I said. His smile tightened. What did you say? Hank, don't start the contract. The boat is secure. I cut him off, my gaze fixed on the horizon, just like you wanted. I stepped off the gangplank onto the wharf, the wood groaning under my feet. I didn't look back at the asterisk Sea Serpent. I didn't need to. I could feel her, a living thing straining against her flimsy tethers, a prisoner waiting for the cell door to rust through. I walked past the shivering guests and the frantic caterers. I walked past the velvet ropes and the cheap lights. As I reached the end of the wharf, the first real gust of the gale hit, a physical blow that staggered me. It howled like a predator, and I heard a sharp crack from behind me as a tent pole snapped. Marcus was shouting my name. I didn't turn around. I just pulled up the collar of my jacket and kept walking into the wind and the rain, leaving him to his party. He wanted a show. The sea was about to give him the performance of a lifetime. The Salty Dog Tavern was warm, smelling of stale beer and fried clams. It was a shelter for the sane. Through the window, steamed from the heat inside and lashed with rain, the central wharf was a distant, dying ember. I sat at a corner table, a cold bottle of beer untouched in my hand. I wasn't drinking, I was bearing witness. A few of the old-timers were scattered around the bar, their quiet conversation replaced by a shared, silent observance of the storm's fury. The wind screamed, rattling the tavern's thick-paned windows, a sound I knew better than my own name. It was the sound of the ocean losing its patience. Sully was there, nursing a coffee at the far end of the bar. He hadn't spoken to me, but his eyes kept flicking from the window to me, a question mark in his gaze. He thought I'd abandoned my boat to a lunatic. He wasn't wrong. A flash of lightning bleached the world white for a second, and the scene on the wharf was seared into my vision. The main tent was a skeleton of bent poles, its canvas skin shredded and flapping like prayer flags in a hurricane. Marcus's red carpet was gone, likely halfway to Boston by now. Figures scrambled in the sickly flickering lights, guests fleeing for their cars, caterers trying to salvage equipment. And there was Marcus. A tiny, furious figure on the dock, his suit plastered to his body, screaming into his phone while the sea spray flew over him like cannon fire. He was trying to command the storm. The ocean wasn't listening. Then came the first report, a sound like a rifle shot that cut through the gale's howl. It was the bowline, the one I'd tied so perfectly, so uselessly. Through the rain-streaked glass I saw the Sea Serpent, its bow lurch violently away from the wharf. The pretty show knot had done its job. It had come undone. The boat was now held only by the stern and spring lines, pivoting on them like a gate swinging open. She was turning her stern to the wind, her bow pointing defiantly toward the harbor mouth, exactly as planned. Marcus saw it. He dropped his phone and ran toward the bow, slipping on the slick planks. He looked like a man trying to leash a whale with a shoelace. He clawed at the empty cleat, as if the rope might magically reappear. The waves, now unimpeded by the breakwater, were hammering the wharf. Each one lifted the Sea Serpent and slammed her back against the bumpers with brutal force. I could feel the impacts in my teeth, even from 100 yards away. I watched the stern line, the one I'd laid across the rusted metal plate. It was holding, but it was a war of attrition. With every surge the boat pulled, grinding the nylon against that steel edge. It was sawing through its own leash. Another gust, stronger this time, hit the harbor like a fist. The Sea Serpent rose on a swell, her full weight straining against the last wounded tether. The sound came a moment later. Not a sharp crack, but a deep, final thump. The stern line parted. The boat was free. For a heartbeat, she seemed to hesitate, caught in the confused currents. Then the wind and the outgoing tide took hold. Her stern swung out, her engines silent, her mast light dark. She moved with a purpose she hadn't shown in months, a ghost slipping her chains. She wasn't drifting, she was escaping. Marcus let out a raw animal scream of pure loss. He stumbled along the wharf, following the boat as she slid past the pilings and into the dark channel. His million-dollar asset, his centerpiece, his brand, was being swallowed by the storm. He was ruined and he knew it. In the tavern, the silence was absolute. Every fisherman was on his feet, staring out the window. They weren't watching a disaster. They were watching a rescue. Slowly, Sully turned his head and looked directly at me. The confusion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a slow dawning, hard-earned respect. He saw the photogenic ropes. He saw the coming storm. He saw me walk away. He finally understood. He lifted his coffee mug in a silent, solemn toast. I picked up my beer and, for the first time that night, took a long, deep drink. It tasted like freedom. Out in the harbor, the silhouette of the Sea Serpent merged with the rain and the darkness, heading for the open water. She was going home. The beer remained half full. No one in the Salty Dog spoke of what they'd seen. They didn't have to. It was a language of the sea, understood in silence. As the last of the gale blew itself out, Sully walked over from the bar and sat down opposite me. He didn't smile. He just looked at my calloused hands on the table. "Heard you use those new lines Thorne bought," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The pretty white ones." I gave a slow, single nod. "They're fine for tying up to a restaurant dock on a sunny afternoon," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. "But they got no heart, no grit for a real storm." He stood up, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a clap of congratulations, it was an anchor of solidarity. "Some boats just aren't meant for a cage, Hank." He squeezed once, then walked away. My reputation, washed away over 6 months of humiliation, had just been towed back into harbor. I walked out into the pre-dawn calm. The air was scoured clean, smelling of salt and wet pavement. The central wharf looked like a shipwreck. Tattered canvas, shattered champagne glasses, and one of Marcus's polished loafers lying forlornly in a puddle. The giant banner with my face on it had been torn from its moorings and was wrapped around a piling, my printed smile submerged in the murky tide. And there was Marcus. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was a shrunken figure in a ruined suit, talking to a grim-faced Coast Guard officer. His voice was a whine, stripped of all its slick confidence. He was talking about insurance clauses, asset liability, and gross negligence. Foreign words to fight a force he couldn't comprehend. His eyes, hollowed out and frantic, found mine across the wreckage. There was no accusation in them. Only the dawning, pathetic horror of a man who had tried to put a leash on a hurricane and was now left holding a frayed end of rope. I held his gaze for a moment, then turned my back on him and faced the ocean. The Coast Guard would search, of course. They'd find nothing. The Sea Serpent was gone. My life's work, my only real asset, was lost to the depths. I was broke. But as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a clean, sharp light across the water, I felt the tide turn inside me. The legend was dead. Good riddance. The fisherman was back. And for the first time, in a long time, the sea felt like freedom again. Tell me about something you, or someone you know, almost gave up on, that turned out to be incredibly special or valuable in the end.